The plasma round screamed overhead as Jace Corin pressed himself against the crystalline outcropping, his weathered hands checking his pulse rifle's charge indicator. 30%. Not good, but it would have to do. The battle for Verexia 9 had been raging for 6 hours, and the Empire's forces showed no signs of retreating from the shattered plains. Jace had been a mercenary for 15 years, long enough to know when a contract was going sideways. The rebellion's intel had been wrong again. What should have been a simple supply line disruption had turned into a full-scale siege, with Imperial dropships raining death from the crimson sky. He risked a glance around the crystal formation. The alien landscape stretched before him like a fever dream, jagged spires of living mineral, pulsed with bioluminescent veins, while pools of liquid starlight reflected the chaos above. Beautiful and deadly, just like everything else in this sector. Movement caught his eye. A figure was running across the open ground between the crystal forests. A young woman in tattered robes, clearly not a combatant. She moved with desperate grace, her dark hair streaming behind her as she darted between cover. Human? No, something was different about her proportions, the way she moved. One of the native Verexians, probably. Damn fool, Jace muttered, watching her stumble over the uneven terrain. The Empire had standing orders to eliminate any native they encountered. She was running straight into a kill zone. The crack of a sniper's rifle echoed across the battlefield. Jace's enhanced vision caught the telltale shimmer of a cloaked Imperial assassin on the ridge above, weapon trained on the fleeing woman. But instead of a plasma bolt, something else glinted in the alien sunlight, a spear, its tip dripping with the sickly green of Corithian poison. A slow, agonizing death. Jace's body moved before his mind could process the decision. Years of combat. Experience compressed into a single moment of action as he vaulted over his cover and sprinted toward the woman. His legs pumped against the unstable ground, his lungs burning in the thin atmosphere. The spear left the assassin's weapon with a whispered hiss. Time seemed to slow as Jace calculated trajectories, distances, possibilities. He wouldn't reach her in time to push her aside. There was only one option. Down! He roared, diving forward just as the woman turned toward his voice. Her eyes violet, definitely not human, widened in shock as Jace's body collided with hers, driving them both to the ground. The poisoned spear meant for her back instead punched through his shoulder, the barbed tip emerging from his chest in a spray of crimson. Pain exploded through his nervous system like liquid fire. The Corithian toxin was already spreading, numbing his extremities while simultaneously setting his nerve endings ablaze. He'd seen what it did to people a week of agony before the heart finally stopped. The woman scrambled out from beneath him, her hands immediately going to his wound. She was saying something in a language he didn't recognize, her voice melodic despite the panic in it. Through his failing vision, Jace could see tears streaming. Down her face, she was crying for him, a stranger who'd just thrown away his life for hers. "Why?" she whispered in accented standard, her hands pressing against the wound, even as his blood flowed between her fingers. "Why did you—" Jace tried to speak, but the poison was stealing his voice. Why indeed? He'd spent years as a gun for hire, loyalty going to whoever paid best. He'd stepped over plenty of bodies, left behind more than a few friends when contracts went bad. When had he become the kind of man who died for strangers? The woman's hands began to glow at first. Jace thought it was the hallucinations Corithian poison was known to cause vivid death dreams. But the light was real, emanating from beneath her skin like captured starlight. Symbols were appearing along her arms, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living text. She spoke again. At this time, the words carried power that resonated in his bones. The language was ancient, pre-human, the kind of thing xenarchaeologists spent lifetimes trying to decode. But somehow, impossibly, Jace understood the meaning, if not the words. a promise, a binding, a debt that could only be paid in blood and breath. The world began to fade around the edges, darkness creeping in from all sides. The last thing Jace saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the woman's face, her violet eyes blazing with an inner fire that seemed to hold the birth and death of stars. The last thing he heard was her voice, no longer afraid, but filled with terrible purpose. "I am bound to you now, Protector, and you to me." Then there was only darkness, and the distant sound of reality tearing at its seams. Consciousness returned to Jace like surfacing from deep water, gradual, disorienting, accompanied by the persistent hum of starship engines. His eyes opened to unfamiliar surroundings, curved walls that seemed grown rather than built, surfaces that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns he'd seen on Phyrexia 9. The air tasted of ozone and something floral he couldn't identify. He sat up carefully, expecting the familiar burn of the poison wound. Instead, his shoulder moved freely, without pain. Pulling aside the strange fabric covering his chest, Jace found unmarked skin where the spear had pierced him. Not even a scar remained. "You heal quickly for a human." The voice made him spin toward the chamber's entrance. The woman from the battlefield stood there, but everything about her had changed. Gone were the tattered peasant robes, replaced by form-fitting armor that seemed to be made of living metal. It shifted color as she moved deep blue to silver to the purple of nebular gases. Her dark hair was now braided with threads of the same responsive material, and a circlet of crystal rested on her brow. But it was her bearing that truly transformed her. Where before she'd been a frightened refugee, now she carried herself with unmistakable authority. This was someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Who are you?" Jace's voice came out rougher than intended. "Princess Kira Vexathra of the Phyrexian line," she replied, stepping into the chamber. "Last surviving heir to the star-blooded crown, daughter. Of the 5th dynasty, and as of 3 days ago, your bonded charge." Jace struggled to process this. 3 days? "And what do you mean, bonded?" Kira moved to a wall panel that responded to her touch, displaying a holographic star chart. "You've been unconscious, while my physicians worked to purge the Corithian toxin from your system. As for the bond," she turned back to him, and those violet eyes seemed to look straight through him. "You triggered something that my bloodline has carried for millennia. A prophecy encoded into our very DNA. I don't believe in prophecies. Whether you believe or not is irrelevant. The ancient architects who engineered my lineage built certain imperatives into our genetic structure. When someone of pure intent sacrifices themselves to protect an heir without knowledge of their station, it activates dormant sequences." She gestured to her arms, where faint traces of the symbols he'd seen were still visible beneath her skin. "You are now my chosen protector, Jace Corin. Our life forces are intertwined." The implications hit him like a physical blow. "You're saying I can't leave? You could try, but you'd find the experience ... unpleasant. The bond ensures we remain close. More importantly, the Empire knows what happened on Phyrexia 9. They've been hunting the star-blooded line for generations, and now they know I'm alive." Her expression hardened. "They also know about you." As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Kira's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with sudden light. "They've found us." The ship lurched violently, throwing Jace against the wall. Through the translucent sections of the hull, he could see the angular forms of Imperial destroyers dropping out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. "How?" he demanded, pulling on the clothes that had been left for him, surprisingly well-fitted combat gear of unfamiliar design. "They have ways of tracking star-blooded energy signatures," Kira replied, her hands dancing over control surfaces that materialized from the walls at her touch. My healing, you created a resonance they could follow. Another impact shook the vessel. Jace could hear the whine of overloaded shields, the harsh chatter of defensive weapons engaging multiple targets. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Can this ship fight them? Kira's smile was sharp as a blade. This isn't just a ship, Jace. It's a living extension of my will, grown from the same biotechnology that created my bloodline. But we're not going to fight, we're going to run. She pressed her palm against a central console, and the ship seemed to exhale around them. The walls became transparent, giving them a full view of the space battle raging outside. Imperial fighters swarmed like angry insects while the larger vessels moved to surround them. "Hold on," Kira whispered, and the symbols on her skin blazed to life. Reality twisted. The stars outside didn't streak into lines like normal hyperspace travel. They folded, origami-like, bringing distant points together while the space between compressed to nothing. Jace felt the transition in his bones, a sensation like falling sideways through dimensions that shouldn't exist. When the universe righted itself, they were elsewhere floating in the shadow of a gas giant, its rings glittering with ice and debris. The Imperial fleet was nowhere to be seen. What was that? Jace breathed. A small demonstration of what it means to be star-blooded, Kira replied, swaying slightly from the effort. My ancestors weren't just engineered for longevity and intelligence. They were given the ability to manipulate the fundamental forces that hold reality together, to rewrite the laws of physics when necessary. She turned to face him fully, and Jace saw something in her expression that made his pulse quicken not fear or authority, but a vulnerability she'd been hiding beneath the royal mask. The Empire fears that power, Jace. They've spent centuries hunting my bloodline to extinction because they know what we're capable of. What I'm capable of? Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But power like this, it's not meant to be wielded alone. The bond between us isn't just mystical, it's practical. You ground me, keep me anchored to humanity. Without that connection, the power could consume me entirely. Jace stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. And what does that make me? Mine, she said simply. And I am yours, whether you choose it or not. The space between them seemed charged with possibility, with the weight of destiny and desire intertwined. But before either could move, new alarms sounded different this time, more urgent. Kira's eyes widened in alarm. They're tracking the residual energy from the fold. We have maybe an hour before they find us again. Then we'd better make good use of it, Jace said, surprised by his own certainty. Tell me everything, Princess. If I'm going to be your protector, I need to know exactly what we're up against. She nodded, relief and something else flickering across her features. Everything, then. But Jace wants you know the full truth about what my bloodline can do. There will be no going back to your old life. Are you prepared for that? Looking into her violet eyes, feeling the strange new awareness of her presence at the edge of his consciousness, Jace realized he'd already left. His old life behind the moment he'd thrown himself in front of that spear. I'm ready, he said, and meant it. The safe house was carved into the heart of a dead moon, its chambers hidden beneath kilometers of ice and stone. Kira had guided them there using coordinates she claimed were written in her blood. Another mystery Jace was beginning to realize. He'd barely scratched the surface of understanding. They'd been there for 2 weeks now, and the enforced proximity was doing things to his concentration that he refused to examine too closely. The bond between them had grown stronger, manifesting in ways both subtle and profound. He could sense her moods, feel the ebb and flow of the strange energy that ran through her veins. When she was upset, his chest tightened. When she laughed, which happened rarely, warmth spread through him like sunlight dot. It was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain professional distance. Focus. Jace, Kira said, her voice carrying a note of amusement that suggested she knew exactly where his thoughts had wandered. They were in the training chamber. She'd somehow convinced the moon base to grow for them, a space that adapted its configuration to whatever combat scenario she programmed out currently. It resembled the crystalline plains of Erexia 9, complete, with the smell of ozone and the feel of thin air. Holographic enemies moved between the formation's Imperial soldiers, whose AI had been programmed with disturbingly realistic tactical responses. "I am focused," Jace replied, checking his weapons. Charge for the third time in as many minutes. The rifle was another mystery grown, rather than manufactured. It seemed to anticipate his targeting and adjust its output accordingly. "No, you're distracted. I can feel it through the bond." Kira materialized beside him with that unnerving silence she'd developed, her bio-armor shifting to match the crystal formations around them. "Your mind is elsewhere." He turned to face her and immediately regretted it. The armor clung to her form like a second skin, and this close he could see the faint luminescence of the symbols, beneath patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, with his heartbeat. "Maybe because I'm still trying to understand what's happening to me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "This bond, I can feel you, Kira. Your emotions, your energy. Sometimes I wake up, and for a moment I can't tell where I end and you begin." Her expression softened. "I know it's the same for me. I've never experienced anything like it." The text spoke of the protector bond, but they were written by people who'd never felt it themselves. What exactly did those texts say? Kira hesitated, and through their connection, he felt a spike of something that might have been embarrassment. They described it as a merging of life forces, two souls becoming. She paused, searching for words. Complementary halves of a greater whole. The holographic training scenario continued around them, enemies moving through their programmed patterns, but neither of them was paying attention anymore. The air between them seemed charged with more than just the residual energy from Kira's abilities. "Show me," Jace said quietly. "What? Your power. Not the ship manipulation or the reality folding. Show me what you can really do." Kira stepped back, uncertainty flickering across her features. "Jace, I don't think I need to understand. If we're bound together, if I'm supposed to protect you, I need to know what I'm protecting." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but not here. Come with me." She led him deeper into the base, to chambers he hadn't known existed. The walls here were different, not the utilitarian construction of the outer areas, but something organic, almost living. They pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns that marked Kira's skin when her power was active. "This is a confluence chamber," she explained, "designed by my ancestors for intimate demonstrations of star-blooded abilities." The word intimate sent heat spiraling through Jace's chest. Meaning? Meaning that what I'm about to show you requires absolute trust between us. The power I carry, it's not just reality manipulation. It's creation itself. The ability to remake things at the molecular level. She turned to face him, and her eyes were already beginning to glow, including people. Before he could ask what she meant, Kira pressed her palm against the chamber's central console. The walls around them became transparent, revealing not the rocky interior of the moon, but something impossible. A view of space that showed not one, but dozens of galaxies, their spiral arms turning slowly in a dance that spanned eons. "This is what my bloodline was created to do," Kira whispered, and the symbols on her skin blazed to life. "To see the universe as it truly is, not separate objects moving through empty space, but a single interconnected web of energy and matter. To understand that reality is malleable, that with enough will and knowledge, anything can be changed." She raised her hand, and one of the distant galaxies began to shift, its spiral arms reorganizing into new patterns. The architects who made us called it the divine prerogative, the right to reshape existence according to our vision. Jace watched, transfixed, as she made stars dance to her will. But what struck him more than the display of power was the expression on her face, the terrible loneliness of someone carrying a burden too vast for any single person to bear. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "and terrifying." "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. "Do you understand now why the bond exists? Why the architects built it into our genetics? This kind of power, it would drive anyone mad eventually. But with you," she turned to him, and he saw tears glittering in her luminous eyes. "With you, I'm not alone in it." The distance between them had somehow closed without either of them moving. Jace could feel the energy radiating from her skin, could see his own reflection in her violet eyes. The bond between them thrummed with tension, with possibilities neither had been willing to voice. "Kira," he said, and her name came out like a prayer. "I know this complicates everything," she whispered. "I know you didn't choose this, didn't ask to be bound to someone like me." He silenced her with a kiss. The moment their lips met, the bond between them flared like a solar storm. Jace felt her power flow into him, felt the vast web of cosmic forces that she navigated daily. But more than that, he felt her fears, her hopes, the crushing weight of responsibility she carried, and beneath it all, the lonely ache of someone who had never been touched without purpose, never been wanted for herself rather than her abilities. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The galaxy display around them had shifted, reflecting the chaos of their emotions in stellar formations that pulsed with their combined heartbeats. "This changes things," Jace said, his hands still cupped around her face. "Everything," she agreed, leaning into his touch. The texts mentioned that a fully realized bond could unlock additional capabilities in both partners. "What kind of capabilities?" Instead of answering, Kira took his hand and placed it against the chamber's control surface. Jace felt a shock of connection, and suddenly he could sense the base around them, not just its physical structure, but its living systems, the way energy flowed through its organic components. "Feel that?" Kira whispered, her hand covering his. He nodded, amazed. "It's like I can sense its heartbeat." "That's a fraction of what I experience constantly. With the bond fully awakened, you'll share more of my perceptions. And I'll gain something from you that I've never had an anchor to humanity, to the world as it is rather than as it could be." The implications were staggering. But before Jace could fully process them, alarms began blaring throughout the base. Emergency. Lighting bathed the chamber in harsh red, and Kira's expression immediately shifted to one of deadly focus. "They've found us," she said, her hand moving to his weapon as she checked the displays. "A full Imperial task force, including one of their new Void Reapers. How long do we have?" "Minutes." She was already moving toward the chamber's exit, her bio-armor shifting to combat configuration. "There's an escape pod in the lower levels, but what?" Kira stopped, turning back to him with an expression he'd never seen before. "The base's self-destruct is tied to my biosignature. If I leave without triggering it, they'll be able to follow our trail indefinitely. But if I stay to activate it, we stay together," Jace said immediately. "That's what the bond means, right? We find another way." She smiled, fierce and beautiful and deadly. "Then we fight. But Jace, what I'm about to do, what we're about to do together, it will change you permanently. Are you ready for that?" Looking at her, feeling the certainty of their connection singing in his bones, Jace realized he'd been ready since the moment he'd thrown himself in front of that spear. "Show me what we can do, Princess." Her smile widened, and the galaxy display around them began to shift into something that looked distinctly like a weapon. The first wave of Imperial drop pods hammered into the moon's surface like falling stars, their impact tremors reaching even the deepest levels of the base. Jace felt each collision through the enhanced awareness the bond had given him, a sensitivity to the life systems around them that was both gift and curse. 47 pods, Kira said, her eyes closed as she interfaced directly with the base's sensors. The symbols on her skin pulsed in complex patterns, and Jace could feel the effort it took her to process so much information simultaneously. 200 Imperial Marines plus support staff. And something else ... double quotes. What kind of something else? Her eyes snapped open, blazing with alarm. A null adept. They brought a null adept. Jace had heard whispers of them, Imperial agents whose minds had been surgically altered to resist psychic influence. They were said to be walking dead zones, spaces where reality itself became more rigid, less malleable. For someone like Kira, whose power depended on flexibility of cosmic forces, they would be poison, she finished, reading his thoughts through their bond. My abilities will be severely limited in his presence. We need to eliminate him first. The base shuddered as the first breach charges detonated in the upper levels. Through the organic walls, Jace could hear the distinctive whine of Imperial plasma cutters beginning their work. How do we find him among 200 Marines? Kira pressed both hands against the wall, and her entire body lit up like a constellation. I'm going to map their life signs through the base's neural network. But Jace, this is going to hurt. Our bond means you'll experience some of what I do. She didn't wait for his confirmation before diving into the interface. Pain exploded through Jace's skull as his senses suddenly expanded beyond anything human perception was meant to handle. He could feel every living thing in the base, from the Marines carving their way through the upper levels to the microscopic organisms in the air recycling systems. But he could also feel the absence, a moving void in the pattern where the null adept moved through the Imperial formation. It was like looking at a cancer in the fabric of reality itself. Level 7, Kira gasped, blood trickling from her nose. Central access shaft. He's heading straight for us. Then we meet him halfway, Jace said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Through the bond, he could feel some of Kira's certainty flowing into him, her absolute faith in their combined capabilities. They made their way through the base's organic corridors, the walls shifting to provide optimal routes, as Kira's will guided them. The bio-rifle in Jace's hands had grown heavier, its living components drawing energy from his own life force to prepare for what was coming. The first Imperial Marines they encountered were almost anticlimactic. Jace's enhanced reflexes, boosted by his connection to Kira, allowed him to move faster than human limitations should have permitted. His rifle's shots found their targets with inhuman precision, while Kira reshaped the corridor around them to provide cover that flowed like liquid. But as they climbed toward level 7, the resistance grew heavier. The Marines had brought serious firepower weapons, designed specifically for fighting enhanced humans. Plasma bursts that could cook a man in his armor. Kinetic accelerators that could punch through ship plating. There, Kira whispered as they reached the central shaft. Do you feel it? Jace nodded. The wrongness in the air was palpable now, a distortion that made his enhanced senses recoil. The null adept was close, his presence like a blank space in the universe. The Marines came first, a full squad in powered armor, moving with the efficiency of veteran killers. But they weren't prepared for what Jace and Kira had become together. Moving in perfect synchronization, they fought like two parts of the same organism. Jace provided covering fire, while Kira reshaped their environment, turning walls into weapons and floor into quicksand. Then the temperature dropped. The null adept stepped into the corridor like winter personified. He had been human once, but the surgical modifications had stripped away everything that made him so. His eyes were silver mirrors, his skin the color of old bone. Where he walked, the organic walls withered and became simple stone. Princes. Vexothra, he said, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. You will surrender yourself for processing, or we will reduce this facility to component atoms. Counterproposal, Kira replied, raising her hand. The symbols on her skin flared and immediately dimmed as his presence pressed against her. How about you go to hell? She tried to reshape the air around him, to turn the very atmosphere into a weapon, but nothing happened. The space around the null adept remained stubbornly, impossibly normal. Korra, Jace said quietly, seeing her strain against the psychic dampening field. The bond. Use the bond. She looked at him, understanding, dawning in her violet eyes. If her power was being suppressed, then perhaps. Together, she whispered. They reached for each other across the connection that joined them, and Jace felt Kira's abilities flow into him, even as his human determination flowed into her. The null adept's field was designed to suppress reality. Manipulation by a single individual, but they were no longer entirely separate beings. The effect was immediate and devastating. The organic walls around them didn't just reshape, they exploded into new configurations, growing crystal spikes that erupted from floor and ceiling. The null adept's eyes widened in the first expression of surprise. Jace had seen from him, but the effort was burning them both out. Jace could feel his life force being drawn into the display of power, could see exhaustion beginning to claim Kira, despite the adrenaline singing in their shared bloodstream. It won't be enough, Kira gasped. Even together, we can't maintain this level of output, and there are more Marines coming. She was right. Through their enhanced awareness, Jace could sense the remaining Imperial forces converging on their position. They had minutes at most before being overwhelmed. Then we. Don't fight them here, he said, an impossible idea taking shape in his mind. You said your bloodline could rewrite reality itself, right? Not just reshape it, actually change the fundamental rules? Yes, but... Her eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. Jace, no. That level of reality manipulation... It could kill us both. And even if it doesn't, you'll be changed permanently. You won't be human anymore. I stopped being entirely human the moment I took that spear for you, he replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Besides, he smiled, feeling her love and terror flowing through their bond, I can't think of anyone I'd rather evolve with. The null adept was fighting his way through the crystal formations they'd created, his presence slowly but inevitably, neutralizing their defenses. Behind him, the sound of approaching boots echoed through the corridors. Do it, Jace said, taking Kira's hand. Show me what we can become. She looked at him for one long moment, then nodded. Hold on to who you are, she whispered. No matter what happens next, remember that you chose this. The symbols on her skin blazed to life one final time, but now they appeared on Jace as well-flowing patterns of light that marked him as something more than human. Together, they reached out to the fundamental forces that held reality together and began to rewrite them. The universe screamed. Reality broke. Jace felt it happen, not as pain, but as liberation. The boundaries that had always defined him, the limits of human perception and capability, simply ceased to exist. Through his bond with Kira, he touched the underlying code of creation itself and found it was far more malleable than anyone had dared imagine. Around them, the moon base began to change, not reshape, transform. The organic walls became something that had never existed before, matter organized according to principles they wrote in real time. The Imperial Marines found themselves wading through corridors that folded back on themselves. their weapons firing at targets that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The Null Adept tried to press forward through the chaos, his dampening field struggling against forces that no longer operated by the rules he'd been designed to counter. Jace watched with senses that had evolved beyond human as the man's carefully crafted psychological modifications began to unravel in the face of impossible complexity. "Now," Kira whispered, her voice harmonizing with frequencies that shouldn't have been audible, "while he's disoriented." They struck together, not with weapons or reshaped matter, but with will made manifest. The space around the Null Adept simply decided he didn't belong there anymore. One moment he was advancing through the transformed corridor. The next, he was elsewhere scattered across several dimensions, his consciousness dispersed among possibilities that had never quite become real. The remaining Marines lasted 37 seconds. When the immediate threat was eliminated, Jace and Kira slowly withdrew from their joined transformation, allowing reality to settle back into something resembling stability. The base around them retained its new configuration, walls that curved through spaces that geometry textbooks insisted couldn't exist, illumination that came from reorganized photons rather than any identifiable source. "How do you feel?" Kira asked, her voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. Jace considered the question. His body felt the same, but his awareness different. "Like I've been living my entire life looking through a keyhole, and someone just opened the door." She smiled, and he could see the relief in her expression. The texts warned that reality, manipulation at that level, could shatter a human mind. But you held together. You stayed yourself. "Because of you," he said, reaching for her hand. When their fingers touched, he could feel the vast network of cosmic forces that she navigated effortlessly, but now filtered through his more grounded human perspective. "Because of us." The moment was interrupted by new alarms different this time, originating from the Imperial task force in orbit above them. "They're not giving up," Kira said, her eyes taking on the distant look that meant she was interfacing with systems beyond the base. "Admiral Fane is preparing to glass the entire moon from orbit. Can they do that? With what they brought?" "Yes. Void Reapers carry planet crackers. They'll turn this rock into an asteroid field rather than risk us escaping again." Jace felt the familiar calm that came before major decisions. "Then we don't run this time? We end it." Kira turned to him, her expression shifting between hope and terror. "Jace, what you're suggesting, it would mean using the full extent of my bloodline's capabilities. Not just local reality manipulation, but cosmic-scale restructuring. The kind of power that conquered galaxies in the old days. The kind of power that could free your people from imperial persecution forever," he countered. "Isn't that what this is really about? Not just survival, but liberation?" She was quiet for a long moment, and through their bond, he could feel her weighing possibilities, calculating consequences across timelines that might or might not come to pass. "There would be no going back," she said finally. "For either of us, what I'm about to attempt will burn away whatever humanity we have left. We'll become something else entirely, something the universe has never seen before. Together?" Together. They made their way to the base's highest chamber, a space Kira's ancestors had designed for exactly this purpose. The walls here were transparent, offering an unobstructed view of the Imperial fleet above dozens of warships arranged in precise formation, their weapons beginning to charge for planetary bombardment. "Beautiful," Kira said softly, but she wasn't looking at the ships. Her gaze was fixed on the stars beyond, the vast cosmic web that connected every point of light in the visible universe. "Do you know what my bloodline was really created to do, Jace? Not just manipulate reality, transcend it. To become living gods with the power to remake creation itself. And the responsibility that comes with that power." She smiled, fierce and radiant. Exactly. The architects weren't conquerors, they were gardeners. They seeded the universe with potential and then stepped back to let it grow. But they left us as fail-safes, in case something went wrong, in case creation needed pruning. The first bombardment lances reached down from orbit, turning sections of the moon's surface into molten glass. The base's shields held, but Jace could feel them weakening under the sustained assault. "Do it," he said, taking her hand. "Show them what it means to threaten the star-blooded heir." Kira closed her eyes and reached out not just with her power, but with everything she was. Through their bond, Jace felt her consciousness expand beyond the confines of her physical form, touching the quantum foam that underlied reality itself. She became a force of nature, a principle of physics given awareness and will, and she pulled him with her. The transformation was indescribable. One moment Jace was human. The next, he was something that had never existed before, a bridge between mortal understanding and cosmic truth. Through Kira's expanded awareness, he could perceive the universe as it truly was, not empty space dotted with matter, but a single interconnected organism of energy and consciousness. The Imperial fleet above them suddenly seemed very small and fragile. "Let me show you mercy," Kira whispered, her voice now carrying the weight of stellar formation. "One chance to withdraw and never return." Admiral Fane's response came as increased bombardment, the planet crackers charging to full power. "So, be it," she said. What happened next would be recorded in Imperial archives as the Virexia incident, a cautionary tale about the dangers of provoking forces beyond human comprehension. The official report described impossible physics, weapons that stopped working, ships that simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. The truth was both simpler and more terrifying. Kira and Jace, joined in perfect unity, reached out to the space around the Imperial fleet and rewrote the local laws of physics. Not dramatically, just small changes to fundamental constants, minor adjustments to the way matter and energy interacted. The Void Reaper's planet crackers turned into glorified light shows as the strong nuclear force ceased to function properly within their firing chambers. Ship hulls became permeable to vacuum as electromagnetic cohesion failed. Life support systems shut down as chemical bonds lost their stability. Within minutes, the most feared fleet in the Imperial Navy had become a collection of debris. Their crews evacuated to emergency pods that Kira's mercy had exempted from the localized reality failure. "Message sent," Jace said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the surviving Imperial officers' rescue beacons sing in harmony. "Message received." Kira agreed. The Empire will think twice before hunting Starblooded again. As they slowly withdrew from their cosmic awareness back to something resembling human consciousness, they found themselves changed in ways both subtle and profound. They were still recognizably themselves, but enhanced, evolved into something that could serve as guardians of the greater tapestry of existence. "What now?" Jace asked, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed distant and cold, but warm and welcoming. "Now we go home," Kira said, but her smile suggested she meant something far grander than any single world. "The Virexian people have been scattered across 100 systems, hiding from Imperial persecution. Time to gather them together again. Time to reclaim our heritage. And us? What do we become?" She turned to him, and in her violet eyes he saw reflections of galaxies yet to be born, civilizations yet to rise, wonders yet to be discovered. "We become what we were always meant to be," she said, taking his hand as reality reshaped itself around their joined will. "The gardeners of infinity, the shepherds of tomorrow." Together, they stepped forward into a universe suddenly full of infinite possibilities, their bond a bridge between what was and what could be. Behind them, the stars began to sing, And across the cosmos, those with the eyes to see witnessed the birth of something new, a love story, written in the fundamental forces of creation itself, a romance that would reshape the very nature of existence. The universe had new gods, and they were magnificent.